It was March 12th, 2019. I was home alone that night. My parents were on vacation, and my sister was spending the night with her girlfriend. Nothing unusual. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I received a text from my boyfriend. We'll call him Mike. "Hey, what are you doing?" I texted him back saying, "I'm just chilling. Nothing special." We chatted for a while, and we decided that he would come over to my house since everybody was gone. I sprang up from my bed and got myself ready. Some time passed before I heard a knock at my front door. That wasn't normal for him. It was one of those cliche boyfriends who would usually climb through my bedroom window. But since I was alone that night, I figured he didn't want to risk busting his ass. I went downstairs and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I then texted my boyfriend, "Hey, where'd you go?" He opened the text and read it, but did not respond. I thought that was strange. My thoughts were immediately interrupted as I heard another loud set of knocks, this time at the back door. Now, I was becoming nervous, and a feeling of dread began to set in. I received another text, not from my boyfriend this time, but from his brother. I almost dropped the phone when I read what was on the screen. "Mike lost his phone earlier today. He wanted me to tell you that he's going to be busy tonight studying for his exams." My heart practically skipped a beat when I received another text from Mike's number. "You look so adorable in your pajamas." Now I knew that somebody I didn't know was outside, watching me. Thinking quickly, I called my boyfriend's number. I heard a ringtone from upstairs, in my bedroom. I ran down the hall to my parents' room. My dad always kept a gun in his closet. After locking the door, I pulled it out, asking myself if I could go through with actually shooting someone. I heard footsteps above me. They soon slowly made their way down the stairs. I called 911 and reported the break-in, whispering into the phone. The dispatch told me the cops would be on their way. My stomach dropped when another call came in. The intruder had dialed my number. In all the panic, I forgot to put my phone on silent. I then heard laughter coming from down the hall. I cannot explain to you how terrifying it is to hear someone laughing in that situation. I was now scared for my life. I then heard a loud bang on the bedroom door. It soon flew open as the intruder entered the room. I saw the shine of a knife in his hand as he raised it into the air. I staggered back, but aimed my father's pistol and pulled the trigger. Mind you, I had never fired a gun before. My dad showed me how to operate it, but hadn't taken me to the range yet. I can't explain how this happened because my eyes were closed. But the shot I fired knocked the knife from the intruder's hand. I then aimed the gun at his head. "Don't move," I told him, making my voice sound as aggressive as possible. The guy must have thought I was a sharpshooter, and had no idea that I actually got lucky. The police soon arrived and forced their way inside the house. They followed my shouting, and made their way to the bedroom, where I still had the intruder at gunpoint. 2 officers put the man into cuffs. Once I got a good look at him, I can honestly say that I didn't recognize him from anywhere. Once he was in the back seat of a cruiser, one of the officers sat me down and took my statement. Long story short, my parents ended their vacation early, and my sister came home the next day. We still have no idea how long he had been watching me for, and how he managed to get Mike's phone. We're all glad that I made it out of that situation alive, and that the man is where he belongs, in jail. This story happened to me when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time, and I had 3 siblings that also lived at home, my brother and 2 sisters. For context, we lived on 5 acres in a rural area in Ohio, surrounded on both sides by forest and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad normally left for work at 2 a.m., so I had always felt like it was my job to be the man of the house, because he was gone during the times where you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was a weekend, my dad was actually home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms upstairs, and coming out of our rooms you could look down over the banister and see our front door. When I woke up, it took a few moments to get out of the haze and realize what was going on. I looked over at the clock and saw that it was 2:30 a.m. My brother told me that there were 2 men at our front door. Now, this really woke me up. We quietly walk out of my room and peek over to look down at the front door. There was no one there, but I noticed my parents off to the side, out of view of the glass on the front door. I whispered down to my dad, and he told me there were 2 guys that had been talking to each other and knocking on our door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my gun, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure they weren't at the front door. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs. My brother was right behind me as we headed over to where my parents were. My parents had awoken to the sound of our dog barking, and had come down to find these 2 men loudly knocking at the door. At this point, the men returned, and began knocking again. The fact that they were there at this time, in a location where the houses are spread out by 100 yards, and still knocking despite a dog barking, made the situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes the men walked away, and we all shuffled across the kitchen, into the family room to peek out the windows, into our driveway, which was lit up by our outside light. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but no one was behind the wheel from what we could see. Immediately the question was, where did these guys go? They weren't in their car, and they were no longer at the front door. Unfortunately, we found out the answer when the handles on our back doors started rattling. They were now actively trying to force their way inside. At this point, I just remember my mom frantically saying my dad's name, as pure terror overwhelmed her. Then, 2 things happened. Adrenaline rushed through me as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might have to use it. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed the phone and called the police and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute, they stopped trying to get inside and disappeared again, only to return to the front door and starting knocking again. Several minutes had gone by, and we suddenly saw the local police flying up in multiple cruisers with their lights on. As they whipped into our driveway and front yard, the two men bolted, attempting to run the long way around the house. One of them disappeared from our view, while another was intercepted by an officer, yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't cooperate and was immediately tased. Some of the other officers went around the house after the other man, while another came up to talk to my dad. They ended up finding the other man hiding in my little sister's playhouse in the backyard. Both of them were under the influence of drugs. They found cocaine on one of the men. They were both arrested that night, but we never found out what they were charged with, or what happened to them. Needless to say, this whole experience wasn't fun. Growing up in a house in the middle of nowhere seems to generate this kind of story. I think I must have been around 9 years old when this happened. My mom was a single mother. Our nearest neighbor was within running distance, but definitely not shouting distance. There was a main road that ran past our house. It would maybe have 2 to 3 cars pass by in the evening, people who were heading into town and avoiding the highway. Our nights were almost always very quiet. It was the kind of place where if you heard a knock on the door, your blood ran cold for a couple of seconds. It usually meant that somebody was lost, or maybe someone had crashed their car on the awkward winding road. Also, for some reason at the time, we didn't have any curtains. We had these huge windows on both sides of our living room. It would always creep me out a bit whenever I was home alone, but my mom never seemed to worry about it. It was a Friday night. We were in the living room watching a movie with our dog. It was pretty much our weekend tradition. It was dark, so it must have been late. That's when we heard a knock on the door. We looked at each other. Both of us were instantly freaked out. But my mother, being the adult, calms down and heads to the door, with me following close behind. She unlocks all the locks on the door and opens it up, but there was no one there. She instantly closes the door, and I start silently panicking and looking at my mom for an explanation. She gave some weak excuse about a deer running into the door or something, which I obviously did not believe. But I didn't argue with her. She seemed to convince herself that everything was fine, and sends me off to bed. Saturday night comes around. Being a child, I pretty much had forgotten about the night before, and I think my mom convinced herself that it didn't happen. I don't think it will surprise anyone what happened after that. The knock came again. Obviously, I instantly remembered what happened the night before, and a chill runs through my body. I don't know if any of you have ever seen your parents look genuinely frightened, but when you're a small child, there is nothing more terrifying. We make our way to the front door, and again, no one is there. This time, we're both undeniably freaked out. As I said before, our living room had these big windows on both sides. When the lights were on, we couldn't see anything outside. But obviously, if anyone was outside, they could see us. Our living room was also at the center of our house, and had the only phone directly in front of one of these big windows. The thought of walking into that room, knowing that whoever was knocking on the door could see us, was beyond creepy. We sat in the kitchen for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. Eventually my mom had to do something. She said it was probably some kids playing a prank. Even back then I knew she was grasping at straws. She carefully heads to the phone in the living room to call the police. It was nerve-wracking, but the police eventually showed up. They do a walkthrough of our property and find nothing. They then tell us to call again if anything happens. Over the next 3 nights, the same thing happened. The police came every time, but since we were out in the middle of nowhere, I can only assume that whoever was responsible had disappeared by the time they got there. Obviously my mother was terrified at this point, living with just her young daughter in the house. I can't imagine how scary this was for her. The police eventually agreed to do a stakeout on our house at night. There was a little path that runs off the main road that led to the front of our house, so that's where they decided to set up, but they made sure that they were out of sight. It was Friday night again, so I was allowed to stay up that night and saw what happened. It was exciting but also kind of scary. During the stakeout, the police observed someone pulling over on the main road, turning off his lights and engine. He made his way down the side road, which had the perfect view into our living room, where he sat for 2 hours, watching our house, before sneaking up to the front door. This was the point where the police made their move and arrested him. We had no idea who he was. He lived several towns away, and he would just come and watch my mom at night and freak us out by knocking on the door. I live in a small town, in a quiet neighborhood that is surrounded by forest. At the time I still lived with my parents in a 3-story townhome. My room was in the basement. One night I heard a tapping sound on one of the windows. The basement had those typical slot windows on ground level. At first I thought it was just a cat or maybe a raccoon, but the tapping became louder. It quickly became obvious there was someone outside, trying to get my attention. I was too scared to draw back the curtain to see what was going on.